no party like a Halloween party. Yes, we are talking about the movie Halloween Party, directed and written by Jay Dahl. And this is a kind of horror movie with comedic elements. It kind of reminds me of somewhat of a 90s horror film in a certain degree. And what's the story? Well, it focuses on this young college student, and she gets a kind of a meme pop up on her friend's phone that essentially asks her deepest, darkest fear, and her friend does as well. And you're meant to obviously put your deepest, darkest fear into this, and if you don't, that fear will come back and kill you. Inevitably, people start dying, and this girl Grace teams up with the local kind of college computer nerd, and together they must try and unravel the mystery that is this killer meme. That's correct, a killer meme. So, let's talk about, first of all, what works in this movie. I have to say, one of the key things for me were our two our main characters. This Grace and Spencer, who are our central protagonists. Really likeable characters, I have to say, and I really enjoyed their chemistry together. They are, there's certainly Spencer is a somewhat stereotypical character, but that's kind of by design to a certain degree, because there is kind of jokes made about that. But nonetheless, I actually really thought they had a great kind of chemistry with one another. They seemed like kind of believable characters. I thought the actors did an excellent job with each of them. The premise of this movie is kind of fun. It isn't something particularly new. We have seen kind of variations on your greatest fears coming back to life and stuff like that. But incorporating it into a kind of a meme, I think is a fun idea, and kind of makes it sort of, obviously modernises it to a certain degree. The actual, let's just say the antagonistic force here is kind of somewhat disturbing in multiple ways. I don't want to say too much about it, but suffice it to say, it's an interesting idea that has kind of somewhat levels of layers in there, because it's you can argue that it demonises a certain type of person. But we're talking about almost literal demons when we say that. And it has some kind of freaky imagery, let's just kind of say that. And some of the stuff here is based on, some science. I'm trying to be as vague as I can. And the kind of like the horror of what can be is just as kind of as frightening, I think, in a way, than the kind of the fictional stuff that this movie actually puts out as well. I'm sounding very cryptic, I know. But, I thought the idea behind the kind of antagonistic force, let me just say that, was a solid one, and makes some interesting kind of set pieces. I thought the movie is quite briskly paced. I think the effect for a relatively low budget movie, the production value here, I've got to say, looks quite high. It has a very polished sheen to it, and this kind of reminds me in a way of the kind of that 90s feel, that very much that sort of that polished sheen that you kind of got in the sort of the 90s. And the effects work, although there's not loads of it. I think the small flashes that we do see of it can work quite well. And the idea behind what our antagonistic forces can do, I've got to say, is somewhat scary, and there's a lot that you could potentially do with that. Maybe what doesn't work. Okay, so let's just move on from what I've just said. There's a lot that you can potentially do with that, but the movie doesn't really do a lot with it, unfortunately. So the idea is that this force can create manifestations of your greatest fears. However, all the manifestations that we see are relatively low budget ones, and kind of these particular people seeming they have fears that can be produced on a very small budget. For example, a big tall guy and things like that, or a man in a mask. It seems quite obvious that obviously the movie can't afford to have any real, set pieces and stuff like that. For example, what would be my greatest fear? Probably a shark. But how would you incorporate that into this story without having, obviously, a underwater kind of sequence and things like that? The effect, the sequences that we do get are of a lower budget, and the kind of and I've seen that like a couple of times where films have done the same thing. You always at your greatest fear tends to be something that which you can produce on a relatively low budget, and that's, I guess, it's just the way it is. It is a lower budget film, but it's kind of notably so. It's just like, that doesn't seem that particularly scary, but it's obviously just something that they can afford. The movie, I think, maybe overpowers our antagonists to some degree, because they almost seem godlike in what they can do, I have to say, and we don't really get any explanation how this is possible, and I feel the movie kind of just doesn't make some sense sometimes. I mean, there's when we have the rules of this kind of like the what you've got to do, that's fine, but towards the end it tends to kind of veer away from that, and we have our big finale, but it doesn't seem to adhere to its own kind of rules, and it kind of sets up to a certain degree. There are a couple of kind of spooky moments here and there, but it's not a particularly scary horror film. But I've got to say, I think it is a fun one. It's a fun premise, which is led by two good actors in some good, likeable characters, with an interesting, although somewhat overblown premise, I have to say. So although I don't think this is going to, blow anyone's socks off necessarily, I think the majority of people will enjoy it, but it's somewhat of a kind of, you have to turn your brain off to a certain degree. I'll say that. But it's an enjoyable film. I actually kind of, was rooting for our characters, was looking forward to just kind of seeing what these kind of like entities would come up with next. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I actually had a lot of fun with this one, despite its somewhat maybe overreaching to a certain degree. 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.